classic level, which gave fossils at many different places. It's known since the end of the 19th century and by publications by Rommel and later also by work by Aïn Boucherit. Yeah? So we collected more material and well, here we see some of the work for paleomag sections and Angus tooth we found in situ. This is a small scale excavation here near to a small tree, and this is another excavation in the other point here. So we did several small scale excavations, and then we've got the other one, level R, which is a little bit higher up in the sequence, and here you see an early excavation and then a later one when we cleared off most of the overburden in the area. So you see that we are moving up the sequence, and I didn't show you the fossils of the other sides because I think you've seen many of them already, all fossils of all the species in the talk of MADE Johannes. But this is our last site which we excavated, or the latest one we discovered, and I would like some of the things to show you. This frog bone, and you see a big variety of species, camel and bear. So many kinds of things. And actually what we are finding is not only, of course we are focusing on archaeology, but also for paleontology. It's very interesting. One of the things we find here is just to pick out one of the beautiful things. We have more material of what I think is Taubertragus or close to it. And this is the holotype from Aïn Boucherit, and actually there are different opinions whether it's Tragelaphus or Taubertragus or so. So if we looked at the metapodules, we found a very nice metapodial associated also with the teeth, which are very clearly tragelophine. And we look to the metapodules, and we take the length and the distal width, and we plot that, and we see the recent species. We see that there are species which have proportions like in most of the living antelopes. Yeah? But there are others which are much more robust, that are the blue ones here. And this is actually two species of Taubertragus. Yeah? And we see this metapodial here is already here on this robust condition. So actually I interpret this as an early presence of the Taubertragus lineage in North Africa. And actually we have Taubertragus from many sites. There's also late Pleistocene in Morocco, and we have one in Aïn Boucherit. There's also in Tigniv. So actually there seems to be a very continuous presence of this kind of elements. Now then we get to Aïn Boucherit. This is This is a scar where an excavation has been before. That's the excavation of Aïn Boucherit, which was at this place. I don't have any better figure of the excavations. And here we see Algérie, a site which we excavated during many years, and you see very extensive excavations. Actually, there's fossils at 3 different levels at a short distance. These, and also we are working on Tigniv. So no one talked much about Tigniv, but we are also working on this side, and we will present in the future our interpretations, our dates of this site. Yeah. So I would like to say something on the environment, because when we are talking on of the humans, we would like in which kind of environment they live. We know already we have human presence in all over tooth, yeah? Indicated by cut marks, by lithics. And so what kind of environment? Now we find that in all of the sites of which we have a lot of material, sorry, I'm mistaking the buttons. So we see that all these sites have a lot of aquatic or amphibian species. So they all have hippopotamus. So a hippopotamus needs a permanent presence of water during all of the year with a depth of at least 1.5 meters. Yeah? So we can be sure there was water all around. small lakes, but at least with this depth, or relatively big rivers, or whatever there was. Yeah? And there's also crocodiles, there's aquatic tortoises like monomies, and fishes, and so this kind of environment was present. So we are sure about that in all the levels, yeah? And where humans were present. But there's also other kinds of animals, and some of them are adapted to close environments, like pigs, which is called Conférence is a pig. There's pigs in all levels, and they need a particular type of soil. They root it for food, and well, they need this kind of environment. So they may have lived in more closed environment, like forests or something like that, near to the water bodies. And there's also bears, yeah, bushes, in many of the sites. But this grades probably in space grades into more open landscapes and more drier landscapes. And there's also evidence for that. I'm not going to show you all the fauna, but some of the animals are typical of dry environments, like here, camelos, and others just of open environments. Yeah? So we had a very diverse environment, and humans were living in this kind of well, landscape. So now we go to the biostratigraphy and biochronology. We have been seeing already many times the paleomagnetic time scale, and actually these sites, many of these sites were known a long time ago. Yeah, so I was saying since the 19th century. Yeah, so during time it became established that these sites were, some of them were middle Villafranchian, others were late Villafranchian. But how many years were this? Well, with the time, years got attached to these ages, and especially after a preliminary paleomag data we published on Aïn, people started making correlations or proposing correlations. And one of the things, well, which was initially proposed in that publication, Sanoni and Angela, was this correlation of Aïn to the Olduvai. Yeah? But it was later supposed by other people that in fact this correlation should be to the Jaramillo. Now that's much younger. That's well, nearly a million years younger. Now biostratigraphy is not very precise, especially if you don't have other dated sites. But this we can tackle. We can do that with biostratigraphy, or we could do that at that time. We are improving now because we get more and more data. So we had the choice between this and that correlation, or yes, okay, there. So we published about that. So this figure you have seen before that. We used Colpoceurus. We've got various remains of Colpoceurus, and one of the things which is very interesting is the morphology of the third model. You can look at it in different ways. You can look to the crown height. The higher the crown, the younger the species. So this is a complete tooth without much wear, and this is another one which has a much higher crown. Yeah? So the teeth also become longer through the addition of different lobes. You can count the numbers of cusps. You can measure the length, or you can calculate the elongation, so the length compared to the width. Yeah? You can do all this kind of things. You can also look to the angle between the crown base and the occlusal surface, which becomes more in the younger samples. So you can look to many different things. And actually, this graph shows just the plane length. And we've got here the one of Aïn. You see there are different species increasing the length, and we see that this line goes through the tooth of Aïn. And we see that it fits very comfortably in this black species, which is called Colpoceurus vesoloni. Yeah, Colpoceurus vesoloni. And it's, well, there's maybe one specimen of a younger species, but it's much more high-crowned and has different morphology. So it fits best here. It fits, if we see here, all these different samples are there compared there to the time scale, and we see that should be before the first appearance of the next species, which is in the Shimura Formation, I think in member G or so. I can't read it very well. But so this is one of the indications we used. And then we looked in our publication in Science, which appeared last year, the robusticity of the metapodules of Aïn. Yeah? And we see there's different, these are metacarpals. Yeah? It's this one, the third one here. And you see, if you look to the distal width, which is on this axis, and the length, which is on the vertical axis, of the metacarpals, of the metatarsals, which are from the foot, you see that there's a group of gracile species in red and yellow, and robust species in black and blue. Yeah? And we see here a time scale with the temporal distribution of the robust and gracile species. And we see there's a time there's no gracile species. And basically in the time of the Jaramillo, there's no gracile species. And as it happens to be that Aïn has a very gracile species, Algérie has a very gracile species, Aïn Boucherit has a gracile species, and so that would not fit with a correlation to the Jaramillo. Yeah? So, but it fits very well with the correlation to the older 5 or thereabouts. Yeah? And then the last appearance of Anancus. Anancus is a proboscidean, a primitive proboscidean. For many people it's a comfort theropod, it's a very primitive elephant. But if we see the last appearances in East Africa, it's well over 3 million years ago, and in South Africa around that time. In Europe around this date, 2 point something. And also in the Indian subcontinent, I don't have exact ages here, but it's also an old species. It doesn't reach nowhere the Jaramillo. Yeah? So that's another indication of the great age of these deposits, yeah? Compared to this Paleomax scale. We don't reach the Jaramillo, that's absolutely clear. Yeah? So actually, we opted for this correlation, yeah? And then we obtained a graph with the species which we have in our sites. Yes? The species are arranged as usual, with the months appearing later, more to the right. Yeah? So then later is the next step. There are many other localities, or several other localities, which are interesting, and you can cue them in. And we used biostratigraphy for that. And actually, then after doing this, we can estimate the ages of these localities. Now, we used evolution for that, or the evolutionary stage. And I will not tell much about it, but this is a very clear one. So you've got Conacaetis. Earlier mammals used to be placed in the genus Orionagra, but now they're placed in Conacaetis. And you see from Aïn Boucherit, a very primitive one with a long course conga. And here you see Aïn Boucherit, where they turn out and curve up. And this is nearly like in the extant species. This from Niarasa is nearly late Pleistocene. Yeah? So you see the evolution here, and this is a primitive one, and this is a more derived one. So Aïn Boucherit should be older, but it still has, it already has ages, so it can be a little bit older. If we estimated the age of Aïn Boucherit around 2.4 million years, Aïn appeared about 2.6 million years in the old world, then the age of Aïn Boucherit must be a little bit closer to 2.6. Yes? And that's how we made this graph. We are putting also allogram. I don't know whether you can read it. It's a very rich site which has Herbarium and no acres, and so in the same way we all of the other localities. And so this gives an idea of the ages of these sites. And one of the things you can find out here, you can see here, is that we found that with this, that the first appearance of acres has to be much older in Africa than previously believed. It was previously believed to appear in Shimura Formation in level member G, and that's about 2.3. I think latest estimates is at a base 2.27 or something like that for Africa, but actually in North Africa it was much over and much closer to the 2.6, which is called in Eurasia. So that's one of the things we found. We also see many other things. We see in this graph that there are different moments with important change. We see here, for instance, this is a relatively stable period apparently. No new taxa appearing here, but here a little bit later new taxa appearing. So there are final events, and these are probably related to climatic change. Now I will show just some examples of faunal change or the evolution of the fauna. We found in Al Ghaba a nice skull of hippopotamus, and if we look at the actual hippopotamus, we see that the eyes are a little bit elevated. We know that from frogs and also from hippos, and so they have this. That's typical for amphibian animals, yeah. But the occiput is not very elevated. If we look to hippopotamus gorgons, the orbit is much elevated, and the occiput is also very elevated. And we see that this one is much more similar to that. Here we see frontal view with the elevation of the orbit. So it's much more like gorgons. But in any case, if this turns out to be the same species, the North African species is called Sirensis and has priority. So that one was defined on an Algerian locality of Tenerife. Yeah? Now these are different hippo species, different species in Africa, and we see the orbits are low in all these forms, and only in this group of 3 species they are really elevated. Yeah? So it has to be either something like amphibious or gorgons, or maybe this Skysensis, which is ancestral to both. Yeah, to this. So then I came up, this is published already, yeah? I came up with this graph with a distribution of selected hippos in south of the Sahara, North Africa, Levantine corridor, and Europe. And there has been several dispersal events. Yeah, and this one is interesting to us. And that one actually happened at the time when lakes seem to have been very extensive in East Africa. For sure you will know this publication by QUATAL. It's in East Africa, but probably lakes, as it depends on global climate, are also common in all of North Africa. And that is when these hippos dispersed. And maybe it's also at the time when our hippos got out of Africa. And then there's another thing. Recently a PhD thesis was presented on the evolution of North African equids compared with those of East Africa. The references here of this PhD thesis. And there's a number of equids are a very difficult group. They're really very, very difficult. Yeah? And well, there are several things you can use. You can use size, you can use protocone size. So this is size is the length, for instance, of the tooth, and protocone size that may be big in some species and short in other species. Yeah? But we can also look to the depth of the lingua flexit. That's reflected in this graph here. That's on the lower molars. So again, the metapodials, when they're gracile or robust, we have seen this kind of graph already. So one of the things which came out of this PhD thesis is that we have the small tabeti here, has these features. It has relatively small protocones, like Apis numidicus, but it's much smaller. Yeah? And it has very gracile metapodials compared to other species, which are, for instance, Apis olvayensis, which is here, which is much more robust. It's a large one. It has longer protocones and various other features. And also it was found that there's a very small astragalus and small teeth in Aïn Boucherit. So actually we have 2 species here, not one as was believed. We have got Apis tabeti and Apis numidicus in Aïn Boucherit. And actually, it was found that Aegus numidicus is present in other North African localities. It's present in East Africa. And so the distribution of both species is much wider than previously believed. It was also found that later localities have a form which is very primitive to Aegus numidicus, and is similar in everything, save for that the metapodials are much smaller. So they are gracile, so this is tabeti, this is numidicus, and these are of intermediate gracility compared to Aegus alderbayensis and tabeti. Yeah? So these have the same degree of robustness. But these ones here are smaller than these ones. So that's Aegus numidicus. It's a descendant of it, and it occurs in later localities. It also shares other features like a very small protocone. So you see here the length of the tooth, of the upper tooth, and here the length of the protocone. Yeah? So you see that this species is really different from Aegus alderbayensis and from Aegus maritabilis. So this species survived longer, yeah? And it's a descendant. And we also found an Aegus tabeti, which is similar to the other one. It's similar to Aegus tabeti, but it's much smaller. And we found it not in North Africa, but we found it in the KBS member, in the Quaternaire, both of the Copifora formation, and in Olderwijk too. So, well, something is lacking. I don't know what happened. Maybe I made that I shortened for Taka. No, it's just disappeared. Well, anyway, we found that really well. Then I have to go back to the end. Or maybe I can do it in this way. I have to get back to the conclusions, but in any case, the horses support, this new study supports again the old age of Aïn Boucherit and the old age of Aïn, because these forms which are present there are older than the forms which evolved from them. Yeah? And I may add also to this that we also have among the latest hipparions. Hipparions were equids which were present in North Africa before Aegus arrived. They survived a little bit longer, they survived longer south of the Sahara, but north of the Sahara among the youngest Aïn. So it is another indication of the old age of this site. Conclusions? Okay, conclusions. Basically, the dating of the fossil localities in the Aïn Boucherit area is a step in the direction of turning biostratigraphy into biochronology. We put ages on the distribution of the animals. And these sites also date events. Some of these are indicated here, so here we see the ages reflected, and the events, the dispersal of hippopotamus, dispersal of humans, dispersals of Aegus. Across the Sahara, that's one of the sites which disappeared. They dispersed from north to south to Africa south of the Sahara, or the other way around. So there's a time when many dispersals were possible. So the Sahara was not a constant barrier to dispersal of animals, and probably also not to humans. And future work will expand the dated faunal sequence. We are working on other sites, and will also help to date many more faunal events. And thank you.